Hello and welcome to this tutorial video for Unifield. Today's lesson, or this video, we're going to look at the process for managing expired items in Unifield. And that's going to be broken down into two or three different components, starting with how to identify the expired quantities. So how do you see what is expired or going to expire in your database? And then once you've identified them, how do you move these items from the stock location, med, log, for example, to the quarantine and eventually to the destruction location. And then also, as you know, there are some items that are managed in Unifield that in your physical stock, they have an expiry date and need to be managed like an expired item. But in Unifield, it does not allow those items to be managed with expired date and batch number. So we will look at the process for moving some of those items as also. This can also relate to items that need to be quarantined or destroyed because of other reasons, like damage or a cold chain breach, etc. So those type of movements will also follow into this process as well. And then finally, we will discuss how to create the Unifield report that shows the history of expired items and damaged items and traces the movements from the stock to the quarantine to ultimately to the destruction. So that is the objective of today's video. And with that, we will move over to Unifield. So in Unifield, the expiry management process will be found in the warehouse application. So let's go to the warehouse. And the first thing we want to do in the warehouse is simply have an overview or identify what items will be expiring. And to do that, we will start in the reporting function. So reporting, and you go to expiry. You have two choices, and the one we're going to discuss today is expiry quantities. So you click on that, and it opens a pop-up window. And for this report, the purpose really is just to give you an overview of what items you have in stock in a specific location that are either expired now, or if you indicate a date in the future, it'll tell you which items will expire between now and that date. So for this example, we're going to look at our med stock. So I type in med. And because I've chosen a specific stock location, I do not need to tick this box. If I was to leave the location blank, then it would give me the overview of expired items for all stock locations. And in that case, you could tick here to exclude the input and output, and that would not show you things that are on an out or a pick, pack, ship, or waiting to be received on incoming shipment. But I recommend looking at a specific stock location, which is why I always choose med or log or ePrep, whatever the location is that needs to be followed for expiries. After you've chosen your stock location, you come down to the period of calculation. And here it says, it's basically asking how many weeks do you want to look in the future to see what is expired. If you put in 0, that means that it will show you all items that are going to be expired as of today's date, which today's date is March 31st. You can barely see here, and that's the end of the month. So it's going to show all items that are expired at the end of March as of today. If I was to change this information to 1, it's going to look 1 week into the future. So today until how many weeks? 1 week. So that would be 7 days. That would show me how many items will expire by April 7th in the database. So you can use this to look into the future if you're running this report perhaps in the middle of the month and you want to have an overview of what will expire by the end of the month, then you would put 2 weeks or or maybe 3 weeks, depending on how many weeks it is until the end of the month. So that's the important part, is that it calculates this number you enter here in weeks, not in days. So I'm going to leave this as 0, and then I'm going to look at my options to process, and I can process it with this button, and it will show me the information in Unifield. If I would prefer a PDF report, I can use this option, and as you are familiar, there's always the option for Excel, and you can use that button here. I am going to review this information inside Unifield, so I click Process. And it opens up a new window. You can see I have a new tab, and it shows me the location med, items that are expired as of today, and I can confirm that by the limit date here, and that indicates that this report is looking for all items that are expired until as of March 31st, 2020. So if we look at the report, we will see it has the code, and then it has the description of the item, and then the location we looked, which was med. And then this is good to pay attention, because the real stock and the real stock quantity is the quantity of this item that you have in the med stock location. This is not the quantity that is expiring. If you come over to the last column, it says expired quantity. And this, for example, on this first row, digoxin, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. It has expiry quantity 20. So we can see that March 31st, 2020, batch number VGG663, 20 are expiring. We have 70 in stock as indicated here, and 20 are expiring. So this is simply how you can review the items that are going to expire based on the date you indicated, and kind of have an idea of what you need to start to prepare for, the quantity, the type of items that are going to need to be moved at the end of the month. And as you can see, again, at the bottom of this report, you also have the options to print with a PDF or Excel if you need to share this information with someone that is not a Unifield user, or for archiving purposes. So now that we've identified the items that are going to expire, let's look at the next step of how to manage these items. So for that, I will go back to the Unifield, back to the warehouse, and now I come down to inventory management. And the very last option is manage expired stock. And we're going to click on this option, and it's going to open up a pop-up window. And it's very simple. It's asking you the source location and the destination location. The source location is simply saying which location are the expired items currently in. And for our example, we know they're in the medical stock location, because this is what we've already reviewed. So we indicate here med stock. And we say which location do we want these items to move to. So let's look at our choices. The only choices you have are quarantine before scrap, and quarantine analyze, and finally destruction. So the quarantine before scrap is the location that you move items to that you know will ultimately be destroyed, and this is where expired items go, or damaged items that can no longer be used, are no longer safe or validated for use by the reference, usually the mission pharmacist, or if it's a technical item, it could be the logistics coordinator, etc. Destruction is the location that items are moved to when they are finally destroyed. So you may collect items for several months in the quarantine before scrap, And when you finally send the items out of your warehouse to be destroyed, then we will show the move to destruction. So it's a two-step process. So in the first step, we're going to choose quarantine before scrap because these items are expired and we know that eventually we will destroy them, but we do not destroy them every month. So we choose that. We have now created a move or prepared a move that's going to look for expired items in the med stock and then prepare a move to take them to quarantine before scrap. So once you've configured your criteria, you come to this button and it says create internal move with expired stock. And this is going to automatically generate an internal move with all the items that Unifield has identified as expired at the end of March. And it's not going to move the items, it's just going to create the document and allow you to update it, verify that it's correct, and then decide when to process the move. So I click on this button, and it takes me, you can see that we are in an internal move document now. An internal move is simply a document that Unifield uses to move items from one location to another location inside Unifield. So most commonly it's from stock to quarantine, or from, if you put an item incorrectly in log stock, you could use the internal move to move an item to med stock, for example. So it's basically just a move that allows you to do housekeeping and keep your database organized inside Unifield. So let's see what we have here. We have 17 items that are proposed expired. And if we went back to look at our original report where we were reviewing what would expire, we can see here that there are also 17 items that were proposed to expire at the end of this month. So you can see that the report has automatically created an internal move with the same items in MedStock that are already expired. So the first thing we want to do is we want to note our reference number, internal move number 36, and I will show you later where you can find this document in Unifield for printing, archiving, etc. And then we have a blank field here called origin. And this is where you can input the description or the justification for this move. So I will say March 2020 expired med items. And that lets me know that this move was for that purpose. The reason type is automatically created by Unifield, and it's proposing that this move is because we're losing items to expiry. If you had if it was only a damaged items, then you could choose damage. But it's important that you choose one of these reasons that indicates the purpose of the move. And then here you have the expected move date. This is automatically generated and proposes the date that you create the document. If you are going to prepare the document today and move the items in the future, you could use this to say, pick a different date that you are going to move the items. But in this case, we will move them today, so we will leave it as today's date. Now, this document is in status draft. So before we can move the items, we have to review it and then confirm it to make sure that, and then we'll be able to process it. So the first thing I do is I look through the items and see if anything looks incorrect. And mainly I'm looking to see if there are any kits, medical kits on this document. And here I see K-Med, and this is a kit for medical modules 2,000 liters. It's important to remove kits from this document before you process it. And the reason is you don't want to move a kit to quarantine. You generally would like to take the expired item out of the kit and replace it with another item. And we will discuss how to correct kit expiries in a different video. But what is important to know on this lesson is that when you're doing your monthly move, you look for any kits. If you see a kit, you simply, and if the kit is not properly needing to be moved to quarantine, if you want the kit to stay in stock and you're just going to correct the item that is expired, you remove it from this document. And you do that by clicking on the red X here. And it's going to say, is this correct? Do you really want to delete the selected records? And in this case we do, because we do not want to put the kit in quarantine. We say OK. And now we're down to 16 items. The kit has been removed from the internal move, so it will stay in medical stock. And like I said, we'll discuss the process for correcting kit expiries in a different lesson. Okay, so now we have our document, internal move 36. We've put the correct header information. It's the March 2020 expired medical items. We're going to move it today, and this is for a loss expiry. So once we have looked at this and the items are okay, there's no more kits, we come to this button and we click confirm. This does not move the items. This simply says that the document has good information and we want to process this information. So Unifield will now propose that all the items are in status not available. And you know that these items are in your stock because you already ran this report here that indicated these items actually are in your medical stock. So to correct this, we ask Unifield to check again and see if the expired items are available. So you always need to do your first step is to click this button. By doing that, Unifield will look for these items, these batch number, this expiry date, in the med stock that indicated here, and it says, yes, actually I do find them, they are available, and I look through my document and I see it is all status available, all have the yellow arrow. So now, the next step would be the physical step. You would take this document and you would print it. And this is the document, and this is the step of the process where you would go and do the physical picking. You would use this document to go and find the items, see if they're physically in stock, and pick them so that in case there's a discrepancy between the Unifield database and your physical stock, we can correct that at the next step. So you do not process the document in Unifield until after you have done the physical picking and identified which items are indeed available and which items perhaps there's a discrepancy. So after you have done the physical picking and you have updated this document, you would go back to Unifield and you would come back to your internal move, and let's say in our example today that we picked and found everything except for the first item, digoxin. Unifield indicated that we had 20 in stock that needed to be moved, but in our physical picking we did not find this item at all. So there is a discrepancy in Unifield. So we do not want to move this item to expiry quarantine because it does not exist in reality. So we need to remove that from this document and then make a physical stock correction to correct the discrepancy later. So the first step is, if you try to click the red X, you'll get a warning that says you can only delete draft moves. And you say OK. And that is because this document is now in status available. So in the previous step, when we deleted the kit, it was in status draft. But at that time, you did not know which items might have a discrepancy. That's not a problem. So the way to solve this is we say, okay, we've done our physical picking. We know which items we have, which items we do not. we want to process that information now. So clicking process is very similar to the incoming shipment, the delivery order, etc. The screen should look familiar. And we're going to say we found every item except for line item number 1. So what I am going to do is I am going to say copy all. And we know that this item is incorrect. We did not find it. So I'm going to click and I'm going to manually change that to 0. And this will leave this item unprocessed. So this is quantity to process 0, and all the other items we did find the correct batch number and expiry date, and they are quantity proposed and quantity found. So now we say process. And that point, when you clicked process, I'm going to go up here, it says internal picking number 37 is closed. Once you clicked process, it took those items. If I open it, I can see 15 items that I found are no longer in Medstock. They have now been moved to the quarantine location. So if you want to see your documents for the internal move, you would come here under warehouse management, and you see an option for internal moves here. And I am going to click on that. And I see that I have 2 for the March 2020 expired med items. One is in status closed, and the other is in status available. So now I know that the closed status is the 15 items that we processed, that were found, and we moved to quarantine. All closed, status closed. If I go back to my list view and I open the one that's in status available, I see that this is the one item we did not find. It's important that you come back to this document and you cancel it, because you've already looked for the item, it does not exist, it means there's a discrepancy, so we do not want to move this item to quarantine, so we cancel it. And when you click cancel, it cancels the document so that there's no pending backorder or internal move for this process, because we know that those items in fact do not exist. So again, that was under the warehouse management, internal moves. And that's why it's important to note your reference number, and also you can track it by the origin, the description you gave the document, so that you know which documents you're looking for. Now there are a couple of ways to have an overview of what items you have moved into your quarantine stock location. So the first option is if you're in the warehouse, so warehouse, inventory management, so here, and then inventory level. You should be familiar with this is the tool that you use to see your stock levels, and the quarantine before scrap location is a stock location just like med, log, etc. So simply you come to the location and you type in quarantine and you say I want to see what I currently have in quarantine before scrap, and you search and it will say we have 13 items, and we know from our previous exercise that we moved 15 items. So I'm going to add the batch, and then I'm going to click expand all. And we have 13 items, but we'll notice that 2 of those items have more than one batch. So that gives us our 15 different batches that we moved. So this is one way you can see what is in your quarantine before scrap location. And each month when you move items from stock to quarantine, it will update this location and add the new items so that you can always have an overview of what items are currently quarantined. Okay, so now we have moved all the items that expired. We've moved all these items with the exception of the digoxin, which we in our example did not find, and with the example exception of the medical kit, which we will discuss in a later video. But for this example, you know that you need to remove kits from the movement unless they indeed are going to be put in quarantine in reality. So now, what happens in the scenario where you have an item in your stock that is damaged or expiring, but Unifield does not manage that item by expiry? So for these items, we also need to move them to quarantine, but we have to use the internal move, a manual move. We cannot use the manage expired stock report as found in the warehouse inventory management. Manage expired stock, because this report only moves items that have an expiry date. So for items that do not have an expiry date but do need to be moved to quarantine, we will use this process called the internal move. So instead of the system automatically creating the internal move, we will create it ourselves manually. And to do that, you go to warehouse management and you go to internal move. And here you see the previous move we did. And in this case, we need to create a new move. And for our example, we're going to have an item, some compressed bandages that are damaged and are unable to be used, and we need to move them to quarantine. So we come here, our reason type, and we choose 12.4, loss due to damage. We're going to move these items today. And here again, you give the brief description of, let's say, damaged item, unable to use. And you can also say March 2020 if you like. You will put whatever description is most appropriate, and if you have any questions, you can check with the supply co to get a validated, standardized description. And then now we simply need to add the item. So we would say new. And for this example, I'm going to use the code SDRE. This item. And this you would enter whatever item, the code for the item that you have identified needs to be taken out of stock and put into quarantine. And so the second thing I do before I do anything else is I indicate the source location. Where is this item in Unifield currently? So I say med stock. I choose it. Where do I want this item to go? Well, it's damaged, so I want it to go to quarantine, and quarantine before scrap, because eventually we will destroy this item. And then I will come over here, and you simply indicate the quantity that is being destroyed. So in this example, we're going to say 1,000 of the items were damaged, and we need to move them to quarantine. So first the code, second the source location, third the destination location, and then finally the quantity is the last thing you do. And the reason you do the quantity last is because you first have to tell it which location to look in, and then it will see if that quantity exists in that location. This is already indicated from the document, from the header level, so it's okay. And then you save and you close. And once you have saved it, it takes you back to the internal move, and you have created the information. You're still in draft status. So that simply means that the information has been created, the document is ready, but the items have not been moved yet. So once you're satisfied with the information, code, quantity, source, and destination, you confirm the document. And again, confirming the document does not move the items. It simply prepares the document saying that the information is good. These are the items that we want to move. Again, you have the green arrow, not available. We know it is available, so we click on check availability. It updates the item and it says, yes, indeed, the item is available. At that point, it's the same process as before. You say, yes, I want to move these items out of stock and into quarantine. So you click process. If you would then go and try print the document, pick the items physically, and once you've picked them and you've made sure that you actually have the item physically in stock, you copy all, 1,000 requested or ordered, and quantity to process 1,000. You come to this and you say process. And now that it's closed, the item has moved from MedStock to the destination location, the quarantine before scrap. And if I want to review my document, I can find my internal move. It's reference number 38, damaged item unable to use March 20. I open that one. If you need to print, you have the print here. For signature, for archiving purposes, etc. I'll close that. And then now, if we wanted to find the item and make sure that it is in quarantine, we go to Warehouse, Inventory Management, and Inventory Level. And the same as before, you would click Quarantine as your search in the location. Oh, typo, misspelled that. Quar. Before scrap, and I will click Search. And now I see I have 14 items, so one more item was added, and I can see it here, SDRE, the compress non-woven, 1,000 quantity has been moved to the quarantine before scrap location. So that is the example of how you create the internal move to manage the expired items using the manage expired stock function, which opens this window we saw earlier. And if you have an item that needs to be moved that does not have an expiry date, then you would use the internal move function and create the move for that item. So now, the next thing we want to look at is how to see the items that are in the quarantine location, or all items that have been moved for scrap, destruction, expiry, etc. And so to do that, we are again in the warehouse, and then we go to reporting. And almost at the bottom, you have expired damaged products report. So we click on that report and it opens a new window. And this will be an overview of all the reports you've generated in the past. But today we want to look at a new report. And this report allows us to configure specific filters that we can tell Unifill which information we want to extract. And as the name of the report says, we're looking specifically at items that are expired, damaged, and have moved to quarantine, scrap, or to the destruction location. So here I'm going to say I want to see everything that moved in March, so March 1st to 31st, and I am interested in everything that started in the med location, so the source location was med, and moved to quarantine. And the reason type filters here are all the, it can be 12.4, all the different reasons that items might move to quarantine or to destruction, whatever destination you indicate here. If you empty these, it will look at all items that moved from this location to this location in this date range. Otherwise, you can select just one. I propose that you empty them all, and so that you have the full overview and not just specific movements. And once you've configured your filters, if you're only interested in med, or if you're only interested in log, you can indicate that. We'll say for this, we're only interested in the medical warehouse. We'll click Generate Report. And it says your file is now ready. You can download it on the right side. So I come up to here, and I click on this link here. And this gives me at the bottom an Excel file. So I click on that, and it should open in Excel. I say yes. So now we have the expired damaged products report. And then we have all the information that tells us when this report was created, generated today, for the dates of the month of March, interested in the med, items that moved from med to quarantine, and only medical items, so no logistics items. And here we can see it has the document number that it moved on. So internal move 37 was the first 15 items we did, and then internal move 38 was the compress, the item that did not have expiry date. All product med, and then the detailed information over here indicating quantity, batch number, expiry date, the source location, and the destination location, and then finally the dates it actually moved on. So this is a nice report that you can extract from Unifield that will tell you, will also give you the overview of what is in your quarantine stock location, all the items that moved, and again, you'll notice that you had lots of different choices for filters to generate that report. The last step in the process for managing expired and damaged items is when it becomes time to actually destroy the items. So far you've seen how to do the monthly move for items that are expired from stock to quarantine, and also how to create a manual internal move for items that need to be put in quarantine that do not have expiry date, or they need to be put in quarantine for another reason. Maybe they were damaged and not expired. So periodically throughout the year, it is determined that we will destroy the items in quarantine. And to do that, we have to move the items physically from your quarantine location in the warehouse, either to destroy them or to a third-party vendor that will do the destruction. But once you move them to be destroyed physically, we need to indicate and update Unifield to indicate that these items have indeed been destroyed. So to do that, again, we're in the warehouse, and we want to go back to inventory management and start again at manage expired stock. And this time we say we want to look in the quarantine location, and we want to move the items to, this time we're going to choose destruction. And we only do this once we physically are destroying the items. They no longer are physically in the warehouse in our quarantine location. So now we're telling Unifield to look in this location, quarantine before scrap, and identify all items, and then prepare a movement, an internal move, to move these items out of Unifield to destruction. So I will create the internal move. And here we will see again that it has 15 line items, And this will be all of the items that have expiry dates. So we will have to do another manual move for the items that are in quarantine that do not have an expiry date. So here we will say June 2020 destruction quarantine items. And we can choose whichever one. You can ask the supply code which of these reasons is better. It could be loss, because some items will be expiry, these items are lost due to expiry. On a different move, we might choose a different reason. And then we come down, and it should look familiar to what we did before. Once we've identified that these items do in fact exist in quarantine physically, we'll confirm the document. Again, we have the green arrows, so we check expired product availability to ask Unifield to refresh its calculation. Now all the items are yellow, status available, quarantine before scrap is the source location, and we're now going to move them to destruction. The items have not moved yet until we process them. So now we will process. We will say that we had all items that Unifield had in quarantine were physically also in the quarantine location in the warehouse, so no discrepancy. We copy all. It puts the quantity from this column into this column, and we process. Now these items, this document is closed. This internal move 39 is closed, and all these items have been moved out of quarantine to destruction. There's no going back at this point. These items are considered out of Unifield, destroyed, and no longer in your warehouse. So that leaves the one item that was not managed by expiry. So if I go back to the inventory level and I search in my quarantine, there's only one item remaining. The other items have been moved. If I search in destruction, and here you have to change your filters because it's no longer inside Unifield. It's destroyed items. So you would remove internal because these have been destroyed and sent out. And you have all the items that were destroyed. I'm also going to show you another way to get this report that's a bit easier. So back to quarantine to identify if any items are still in the quarantine scrap location that need to be moved. And we see yes, we have the one item. It did not move on the previous move because it does not have an expiry date. So I know that I need to create that move manually, have quantity 1000 that needs to be destroyed as well. So I'll go to warehouse management, internal move. I need to create a new move. We'll say June 2020 destruction. We'll say it was damaged. Removing it, we'll say it was in, pretend it's the end of June, and I'll add the item. SDRE, this item. I now have to indicate that it is in the source location. The item is currently in quarantine before scrap, and I want to move it to destruction. And I want to move 1000, the full quantity that was there. Everything else is correct. Save and close. It's the correct item. I confirm. I ask it to check availability. And then I say yes, I want to process this move. 1,000, 1,000, process. And after doing this, you have now moved the items that are not managed by expiry date but do need to be destroyed from quarantine before scrap to destruction. The items is closed, and if we went back to look in our inventory level, we would see that the movement is now in destruction. Now finally, when you destroy items and you move them out of your warehouse, out of your physical quarantine zone, and you give them either to a third party to destroy, maybe another MSF section destroys them, or maybe we destroy them internally with the Watson department. Either way, you need to give an overview of what items, the quantity, the types of items that they are receiving and that they will be destroying. And to get this information, you can extract the expired damaged report. And to do that, you go to reporting, expired damaged products. And you can see that here's the history of previous reports that we have generated, but now we need a new report so we can give the responsible party for destruction the information. And we want to say we are only going to be interested in items that have moved to destruction. And let's say, because if you don't put a date range, it'll take all items that have ever moved in the history of your Unifield from a location to destruction. So we'll say that we know that we did this move on March 31st. So we will say March 31st to March 31st. So just look at the items that moved today. And you can choose a source location, but maybe you have some items from log and some items from med that were destroyed on the same day. So this doesn't have to be indicated. You can also choose med or log. But if you want to see all items that were moved on March 31st to destruction, you would leave these blank. And we'll also say we want to see all items, not just the items with a specific reason type. And now you generate the report. And again, you see here, it tells us that our file is ready over on the right-hand side. So I click on this. It opens Excel down at the bottom. I click Excel. I click yes. And I enable. All right, so now I can see that generated on March 31st for items that moved on March 31st to location. And I can see that I have all of the items that moved because of expiry, so 15 items. And then the one item that moved because of damage. And you can see it does not have a batch number or expiry date. And you have all the information. It went from quarantine before scrap, and we can to destruction. And the actual move date was today, March 31st. All the batch and expiry information, the quantity, and important for the person doing the destruction, the details of what type of items it has. So this is the report you can use, which is found here, expired damaged products, to extract the information and share with the relevant parties so that they have supporting documentation for the items being destroyed or moved. And so that concludes today's video about the process for managing your expired items, identifying them, which we used we used the expiry quantities to identify, and that created this report that we looked at the beginning. And then once identified, we used the manage expired stock to move the items from the stock location to quarantine, and for items that weren't expired, we use the internal move to move the items from their stock location to quarantine. And finally, once we destroyed the items, we can use this expired damaged products report to have the overview of what items have moved from which location to which location and all the details to support that move. And finally, to show you some additional resources to support this video, if you go to your USB key or your Unifield library and you open folder number 4, Working Instructions, you'll see here Working Instruction number 32, 14, How to Manage Scrap and Destruction Process in Unifield. And if you open that, you'll see it's a work instruction that details the information that supports this video, so you have this resource as well. Additionally, if you go to the Unifield manual and you type in the word expiry, you will come down to the section Management of Expiry Dates. And you see it has expiry quantities report, the how to manage expired stock, and how to produce the expired damaged products report. All of that here, and it tells you the page number and where to find it. So in your manual, this is the chapter 5, the Unifield Supply Manual Warehouse, you have additional resources that also describe the process. So I hope this was clear. Let me know if any questions. Please feel free to email me and we can discuss it further. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon.